Today I'm going to talk to you about forms. Before that, I'm going to introduce myself quickly. Hi, my name is Kenza. I curate Let's React, which is a React Native newsletter. We're just about to reach 2,000 subscribers, so that's good news. I'm also the founder of a meetup in Montreal, where I live. And I'm a software engineer at a company called Breed Life, which is a company that's trying to change the face of the insurance industry. And the insurance industry's got lots of forms. So, apart from that, I'm also the mommy of a hedgehog. And you know how people in these kinds of talks always put pictures of their cats and dogs and all that? Well, I think hedgehogs are underrepresented. So, meet Logan. So, I'm going to be using Logan as picture what's saying. So I'm going to be putting pictures of him here and there. So get ready for that. So what's the actual problems with forms? You may be thinking, well, I got no problems with forms. You know, my login form's working great. So what are you talking about? Why do I need a solution? Well, here's the thing. So for simple forms, it could be okay. But the more complex your form gets, the worse it gets. There's tons of boilerplate when you're making forms with React. You gotta store your state. You gotta deal with your onChange handlers. You gotta deal with validation. You gotta deal with error handling from the API calls. Then you gotta actually do the submission and all that. So that makes tons of boilerplate. Let's go through an example to actually illustrate that. So you're at a company, and your product manager comes in, and he's like, OK, so we're going to make this app, and this app's going to have a sign-up form. It's super simple, you know, so it shouldn't take you too long. This sign-up form is just going to have 4 fields, email, password, name, phone number. We want validation on all the fields, just 2 API calls, sign up and then log in, and then some error handling. Should be easy, right? So you make your form, hook up some things. There's a little bit of boilerplate, but you're like, OK, it's fine. I'm never going to touch it again. Good. Perfect. A couple of months later, the product manager comes back, and he's like, yeah, you know what? With this form, people are getting trouble with their password. We have like a huge amount of people who just reset their password all the time because they type it, and they type it wrong, or they don't remember it. So we want to improve that. So we have new requirements. Now we want to toggle between displaying and hiding the people's passwords. And we also want a confirmed password field, because these are great, right? And also we want to show in real time the password validation. So, you know, all those complicated rules. We want to show like check marks and X's and all that, just to show as you're writing all that. So as you're writing this logic, you realize, damn, this file's getting damn long. I don't know if I like this. It gets pretty complicated when you got to deal with fields that depend on other fields, and then a bunch of state everywhere. Your state's probably like 20 lines of code long at that point. So, you know, we need a solution. So, like I said, the more complex your form gets, the messier it is. When you got to deal with optional versus required fields, fields that depend on other fields. In some of our products, we have fields that hide or display depending on answers to 1 or more fields, and then we got answers that can be that have a default value. So if you like selected this, and then you typed this, and then you select this other thing, then the default value is going to be this. And then some fields have to be disabled based on other fields. It gets really, really complex. So I don't know. Let's say I convinced you. Forms can get pretty crazy. So what can I do about it? So I'm going to go through 3 libraries that exist that help you simplify your forms. Now, disclaimer, every library has pros and cons. So this is my personal experience, and that's it. All right. First up, Redux Form. Who actually uses Redux Form in production right now? All right, it's OK. Not too bad. So Redux Form You've probably heard of it. It's a Redux-based solution to forms, and it keeps everything form-related in your Redux state. So the fields values, the currently focused field, the previously focused field, sync and async validation, error, submission, everything you can think of, it's in your Redux state. Now, that's pretty much has the advantages of Redux itself, which means it's a single source of truth. You can easily share form data between different components. And since it uses Redux, it's great for debugging purposes. You got your developer tools, and it's pretty great. It's also very widely used, 390K downloads per week, which is a lot. But it's actually gone down recently. And there are a few reasons for that. First of all, it'll only make sense if you're already using Redux. You're not going to add Redux Form if you don't use Redux. If you use MobX, let's say, it doesn't make any sense to add Redux Form. So it's specific to Redux. And also, your Redux store is updated on every single keystroke. And that's very bad for performance. I once used Redux Form on an app that had an Android version, and that was just not usable, unfortunately. You know how Android performance can get pretty tricky. So as I was typing, it would just take like 3 or 4 seconds for the letters to actually appear on the inputs. So that's not too great. So if it's like a small app, it's okay. If it gets bigger, it's a little trickier. Also, and that's a very important point, React Prophet and Redux creator Dan Abramov said that form state is inherently ephemeral, so tracking it in Redux is unnecessary. If Dan says it, you know. So also, your business logic can get pretty complicated. So if you got to deal with fields that depend on other fields and all that, it doesn't help you a lot with your boilerplate. It actually makes it sometimes harder to deal with. And also, it's a pretty big bundle size. So if I were to describe Redux Form in one picture, it would be this. That's not my hedgehog. My hedgehog's very healthy. Next up, Final Form. So Final Form is a subscription-based form state management library, and it uses the observer pattern. It's also built by the same guy who built Redux Form. So he heard people's complaints, and he tried to make something that would be better. It's got some pros. It's framework agnostic, so whether you use React, Vue, Angular, whatever, you can use React Final Form. It's got no dependencies whatsoever. It also has 0 configuration. Now, I didn't mention that for Redux Form, but Redux Form is pretty complicated to set up. I don't know how it is nowadays, but when I last used it about a year ago, it took like a few days to get it to work properly. So this is just, you just install it, start using it. So that's pretty cool. And it has a very small bundle, again, because it has no dependencies. Now, I'm not a fan of the observer pattern. I find it's just very magical. Stuff happens, and you're not 100% sure why, and then you're just like, okay, works, I'm fine with it. But I like to know what's going on. So I'm not the biggest fan of this. It's also hard to debug. So like anything that involves subscriptions, like RxJS or anything like that, when you got to do some debugging, good luck. It's also the least widely used option that I'm going to talk about today, but it's still pretty good. So if I describe Final Form in one picture, it would be this. So stuff's happening, but you don't know what, but it works. All right, next up, Formik. So Formik is a little different than the other two options. It's a form helper library that handles 3 core things: getting values in and out of form state, validation and error messages, and handling form submission. The pros, it's got 0 configuration. Again, same thing as Final Form. You just install it, start using it. It has powerful validation with Yup. So Yup is a library based on Joy. That's usually the one people have heard of. And it's very declarative, very nice to use. So you just set up a schema with all your validation logic, and then pass it to Formik, and Formik handles all the validation for you. It also supports nested structures. So you could pass it an ID of address.city, and it'll handle creating your data structure for you and putting the city in an object called address. It's no magic. There's no magic in there at all. It's just a plain old React component. So if you've got problems with Formik, you probably have problems with React itself. So it's much easier to debug than subscription logic. It's also a relatively small bundle. It's smaller than Redux Form, bigger than Final Form, a little in between. And this one I was surprised, actually. It's actually exceeded Redux Form in terms of weekly downloads. It's now at 500K downloads. I thought it was like an underdog, but look at that. It's also recommended in the official React docs. There's an actual part about controlled components in the React docs, and at the end there's a note about how, maybe you should reuse Formik. So, a little bit of code, because you gotta have some. So this is how you write your form. You have this React component called Formik. You pass it your initial values. That's the values it's going to pass to the fields themselves. Then after that, you have the render prop. They're probably going to change this to hooks soon, but not yet. Then you got render props. And in there, you pass your fields. So in your field, for example, here you see the first field. There's name. Can I do the... Okay, I don't know how to do the pointer thing. There's name, email, placeholder email. So you pass a couple of fields, and it's able to basically handle setting the value, setting onChange, dealing with validation, a bunch of stuff, and it helps a lot in terms of boilerplate. So that's something pretty great. In terms of validation, this is what your yup schema would look like. I find this great. It's super declarative. It's super easy to test. You just define what's the shape of object you're expecting. So you're expecting an object with name, age, email, password, and this is what this should be. So your age should be a number, it's required, it's a positive number, it's an integer. So it's much easier to write than custom validation logic. And what you do here is that this schema, you just pass it to Formik like this, validation schema, and then it matches those keys, object keys here, with the name prop there. And it's able to do the validation for you. So it's pretty practical. Now, I don't know if anyone has ever met the perfect library, but there is none. So Formik, like any other library, it has cons as well, although it is my personal favorite. So it's framework specific. So as opposed to Final Form or Redux Form, you can only use it with React and React Native. It's a React component, so it's hard to use in anything else. It's also inflexible in some ways. We had a lot of trouble at Breathe Life trying to set up auto-save behavior. So as you're typing in your form, it auto-saves automatically every few seconds. That was pretty hard to do with Formik. We had to do a workaround. It was hard to look into the onBlur prop. It does a lot of things for you, but it expects you to use it in a certain way, and that's not always the best. It also claims to only support 80% of use cases. So when you get to the last 20%, things start to get weird. Like I said, with the auto-save, stuff like that. So it just tells you this is what we're expecting you to do. And if you're falling out of that, then just do your own thing. Also, and this is an interesting one, on our platform, we're using Material UI and style components together. And with Formik, that's just a bad mix. Things just start to get really slow. There's an open issue on Formik about this. But basically, the combination of those three things and a really long form gets things not to work too well. Our solution was just to split up this long form in a bunch of different sections. That might not always fly with your designer, so not always an option. Also, the entire form validates on every key press, which is good in some ways, because if you have fields that depend on other fields, so let's say you have a field that if you type something in this other field, then you got to validate this field compared to that one. So in terms of that, you know, it's the only way it could do that, by validating the entire form, but it's not that great in terms of performance. So, some conclusion. Redux Form is probably not a good idea for React Native apps, especially if it's not an iOS-only React Native app, and yes, those do exist. Final Form is okay if you're fine with some magic. I'm not too happy with that, but, you know, some people are just like, yay, RxJS, so if you're one of those folks, you're gonna love Final Form. Formik is pretty great, but it's not one size fits all. And, you know, at the end of the day, there are no perfect libraries. On our side, we actually had to remove Formik. We just made that decision last week. And the reason why is because we have super, super complicated forms with super complicated logic. These are insurance products. So we needed to be able to test them, test the outcomes. So like I said, logic where you filled up this input, you answered this there, and then this part is checked and has a value of this, something like that. So these are complicated business logics, and we couldn't go through the front end to do those tests because that would be too long. And Formik handles onChange, the value, all that for you. So we just wanted to have input-output tests, and that's not possible with Formik because the main value prop of Formik is that it reduces your boilerplate. So on our side, unfortunately, that didn't work, but we will still be using it in other products that are simpler. This one was just a little too intense. So again, any library you find, you're going to go through the process of, you know, being super happy, I found a solution to all my problems, and then you're going to be like, oh, wait, what is this thing? Oh, no. And, you know, you're going to make that face, and you're like, okay, start over, next library. So that's the story of the JavaScript world, but, you know, maybe one day. Also, disclaimer, no animals were harmed in the context of this presentation. Thank you.